Shabbat shalom, everyone. Here, let me share my the blessing. Here it is. Can everybody see it?
Mm-hmm.
All right, here we go. Oh, but please mute yourselves for this. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. Okay, so anybody remember where we were last time?
Solomon.
Wait, with Solomon?
We have gotten to Solomon, exactly. But so
Didn't David give Solomon instructions about getting rid of all his enemies? Something like that.
in fact, his last words were not so gentle and kind, were they?
No, right, you're right.
Yeah, remember there's this guy Shammai that he considers to be an enemy. And he says he had sworn to Shammai that he would not kill him by the sword.
Right.
Loophole available.
Yeah,
right?
no kidding.
So Solomon gets to figure out what the loophole is. Okay, so we saw the end of the reign of King David, and Solomon. There was a whole battle between Adonijah, who was the older son, and Solomon wins out, and he's been installed, and he's already shown himself to be pretty shrewd and tough. He's willing to do what needs to be done. So let's take a look at this is chapter 2. Okay, so but we're on verse 36, but before we get there, just remember that Solomon had to deal with some of these people like Joab, right? And just making sure that he's going to be on the throne without any threats. Okay, and now we're going to deal with Shammai. This is the loophole guy. Okay, so would somebody like to read? Okay, Christine.
Yes. Oh, you want to do it, Jake? Go.
Yeah, I'll go after you.
Okay.
There's plenty to read.
Yeah.
Good. Then the king sent and some what? Wait a
I'm
minute.
sorry. Go ahead.
I'm not
Just
a fast
testing to make
reader.
sure you're awake. Yeah.
Then the king sent and summoned Shammai and said to him, build yourself a house in Jerusalem and live there, and do not go out from there to any place whatever. For on the day you go out and cross the Wadi Kidron, know for certain that you shall die. Your blood shall be on your own head. And Shammai said to the king, the sentence is fair, as my lord the king has said, so will your servant do. So Shammai lived in Jerusalem many days. But it happened at the end of 3 years that 2 of Shammai's slaves ran away to King Achish, son of Maacah of Gath. When it was told to Shammai, your slaves are in Gath, Shammai rose and saddled a donkey and went to Achish in Gath to search for his slaves. Shammai went and brought his slaves from Gath. When Solomon was told that Shammai had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and returned, the king sent and summoned Shammai and said to him, did I not make you swear by the Lord and solemnly adjure you, saying, know for certain that on the day you go out and go to any place whatever, you shall die? And you said to me, the sentence is fair, I accept. Why then have you not kept your oath to the Lord and the commandment with which I charged you? The king also said to Shammai, you know in your heart all the evil you did to my father, King David, so the Lord will bring back your evil on your own head. But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. Then the king commanded Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, and he went out and struck him down, and he died. So the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon.
Okay, so fairly ruthless, like let's just get rid of all these people. And he did his father's bidding. Sort of set up a little bit of a trap, right? Because you can't leave your house. Doesn't sound so bad until, well, in this case, your slaves ran away. and you have to go back and fetch them. So he's gone, and the enemies are now taken care of. So I
Pretty
think,
clever of the slaves.
oh yeah,
Get
you
the
wonder
guy under
whether,
house arrest and then run away.
right. And, maybe somebody bribed them to leave so that they could
Yeah.
have an excuse to kill him. Who knows? Okay, so let's go on to the next chapter. And remember, Solomon is a very, very wise man. And you want to start this chapter also, Christine?
Sure. Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people were sacrificing at the high places. However, because no house had yet been built for the name of the Lord.
Okay, so he's making a political alliance with Egypt by marrying the daughter. That's pretty, wise of
Pretty
him,
smart.
right? Because, Israel is pretty much sandwiched between the Babylonian Empire and the Egyptian Empire, right? And
Right.
or whatever comes after Babylonia, Persia and etc. So they're squished in there, and so it's a really smart idea to have an alliance with Egypt. So the Pharaoh's not tempted to come and take you over.
Mhm.
So he's savvy on that score, and of course he's a wonderful, perfect king. Okay.
Okay. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and offered incense at the high places. The king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the principal high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I should give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept him for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, although I am only a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. Your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this great people of yours?"
Okay, so what's this image that we're getting of King David here?
Little revisionist history, right?
Exactly. It's definitely there is a belief from scholars that this whole section, this historical section in the prophets, was edited by a Deuteronomist, who's going to kind of repaint a few things, like David's portrait, an exemplary servant of God, hardly, right? And somehow Solomon is following in the footsteps of his really pious father, which, again, is not any kind of portrait of David that we had from before. But interestingly, he's given make a wish, you can have anything you want. And he chooses wisdom, makes him a very elevated guy. He doesn't say, give me lots of money, give me more horses, give me more wives, or whatever it is, but give me wisdom. So that's something to be admired.
Mhm. It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. God said to him, "Because you have asked this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall rise after you." Well, that's a little depressing. I give
It's
you,
been proven by history, right?
we freaking blew it, folks. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor all your life. No other king shall compare with you. If you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your life. Well, that's very Deuteronomic.
Yeah.
Then Solomon awoke. It had been a dream. He came to Jerusalem, where he stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. He offered up burnt offerings and offerings of well-being, and provided a feast for all his servants.
So of course, this is also a very different portrait of a king than the one we had of David. I mean, David didn't really consult with God except, I think to win some battles and the like. And he did do some teshuvah when he killed a guy, whose wife he had bedded. But here, you've got this sort of legendary kind of story, about Solomon. This is not the kind of story we had of David. It's much more, mythical, right? But now we're going to get this very famous story.
I love this story. This is great. This is a story that circulates in the adoption circles quite a lot.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Later, two women who were prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, "Please, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then on the third day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth. We were together. There was no one else with us in the house. Only the two of us were in the house. Then this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. She got up in the middle of the night and took my son from beside me while your servant slept. She laid him at her breast, and she laid her dead son at my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my son, I saw that he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, clearly it was not the son I had born." But the other woman said, "No, the living son is mine, and the dead son is yours." The first said, "No, the dead son is yours, and the living son is mine." So they argued before the king.
Okay, let's just stop for a moment. So, okay, if you were faced, and if you know the end of the story, don't
Okay.
tell it.
No
Don't give us a
spoiler
spoil-
alert.
Yeah. But if you were faced with such a problem, how would you try to resolve it? Two women are claiming that this one live baby is theirs, and how would you be able to tell the difference between the two?
DNA.
I was going to say the
great.
CSI to the solution.
I got to tell you, I heard this incredible, This American Life, which is on NPR, Ira Glass's wonderful, wonderful show. And there was a story of a switched at birth situation. These two women, I don't remember exactly where they were, but anyway, they were in the same religious community. I mean, they went to the same church. Anyway, this woman came home with her baby and she knew it was the wrong one. And she said something to her husband, and the husband didn't want to ruin the reputation of the doctor. So didn't want to complain or do anything, right? And then the woman got very, very sick for a while. And so by the time she was better, it was like really too late. So in the one family was very pious and very serious. And the daughter they had was completely different. She looked different. She acted differently. I mean, interestingly, just based on her own, DNA, she was a very different person, nurture, nature, it was a lot of nature. And the other family was much more lighthearted, and the daughter was very serious and also, again, looked very different. And so the one family didn't know. I mean, nobody knew except the mother. And maybe the father kept some doubts in his brain, but the one mother knew. And it wasn't until many years later, I think the daughters were now like in their 40s, that the mother finally confessed. Even though people had, at church had been saying, "Gee, you look like you're adopted," or what, because the daughter looks so different. Anyway, they finally revealed it to everybody, which was very disruptive because, what do you do then? Do you reject your own daughter and embrace the one that's your genetic daughter? Do you embrace both? It was of course very, very upsetting. So, I mean, these things really happen. So here you've got the two prostitutes, and one has a dead baby, one has a live baby. What do you do to try to, there's no DNA testing in those days. And the same thing with this situation on NPR. It wasn't until there was DNA testing they could finally say, oh, wait a second. Any thoughts? Yeah.
one was a newborn and the other one was 3 days old, and there is a little bit of a difference.
Yeah.
That's very smart, but they obviously weren't that smart at that time.
Well, just because, somebody is going to be very observant about their own baby, usually, that there could be minor, like birthmarks,
Sure.
moles, whatever.
Right. I mean, of course, they're not doing it really scientifically because
I know CSI wasn't on in those days.
they have a larger point to share. Yeah, go ahead, Jane.
Well, one thing you can do, or one option, is that neither of them gets the live baby, that the baby is given to a couple who cannot have children. And that family will bring the baby up because they'll have much more appreciation for it.
Okay, that's an interesting.
And I would
Although-
think that if they were prostitutes, a baby gets in the way of your job.
It's interesting that they're both prostitutes.
Not
and both,
necessarily.
yeah.
They're not interested in what you're holding in your arm.
But that would, I mean, I know the end of the story, but,
Yeah.
but that would have been, that's an option.
Yeah, but that transfers the burden to the child, right? I mean, there are questions. There always are questions.
The adoptive parents, the child doesn't know anything.
Yeah, but it's not fair to
Yeah.
the real mother who didn't lie on her kid and
Right.
stuff the kid out.
Well,
All right,
yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah,
prostitution was one of the few job opportunities for
Thank
women
you.
back then. So it's not the same as today. We don't know whether or not the child was actually the result of a relationship versus a John. I mean, the assumption is that, well, these women don't care for the kids because they're,
No.
but who knows?
Well, they
Um,
obviously care enough to want to, claim the kid. Otherwise,
So
the
they
one with
should
the
just
dead baby
share
could
it,
have said,
you
eh.
know? Yeah, they could have had,
Particularly
like,
if women were widows, that was the only thing they could do.
the only thing. So, they could have shared custody.
The
It's
kid
they
could
were
have been
already
born
living
while he was
together.
alive.
The baby could have two moms. There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, they lived in the same house. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, let's see what Solomon decides to do and decide whether that's the best solution or not. Okay, let's see. Let's go down here.
Then the king says, the one says, this is my son who is alive and your son is dead. While the other one says, not so, your son is dead and my son is the living one. So the king said, bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. The king said, divide the living boy in two, then give half to the one and half to the other. But the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because compassion for her son burned within her, please, my lord, give her the living boy. Certainly do not kill him. The other said, it shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide it. Then the king responded, give her the living boy. Do not kill him. She is his mother. All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king because they perceived the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice.
So he's threats, cutting the kid in two is sort of like saying, okay, well, here's, a cake, cut it in two, you each get half, right?
Right.
And, the sort of logical thing you would do without something that's actually alive. And he knows very well that this is going to provoke some kind of reaction. Like the woman whose son it is not is perfectly okay having the kid killed, right? Because she's already, snuffed out her own kid. But the woman who is really the mother is so protective of her actual child that she's willing to give the child up to the other one, the other woman.
This actually never made sense to me, because if the woman whose child died, she would be extremely, and she steals the other child, she would be extremely protective of that child because she really wants it. This depends on a lot of assumptions, which I don't think you can make.
Well, I think probably it was written, no offense, by men, and maybe they didn't understand how a woman would
Postmortem
feel about
depression.
her baby. What's that,
It wasn't
Melissa?
written by men, it was written by patriarchs.
Yes, thank you. It was, no one understood postmortem depression.
Yeah.
Here this woman has just killed her child. You would want to in taking the other child, it may just have been a psychological way to survive what had just happened too. I mean, so, yeah, I think Solomon could have come up with a better remedy, but he was just a patriarch. So
Yeah, that's all. It's the perfect patriarchal solution.
But Mark and Mickey, do you want to defend your?
No, I just would point out that we are nurses, and I think you meant to say postpartum and not.
Yeah, the postmortem
But it could
depression.
be postmortem,
Sorry.
but anyway.
It was both. It was both
It was
postpartum
both.
and postmortem.
Oh,
yes, thank you though.
I think it's a
It's
moral
hard to
issue.
investigate that one.
I think it's a moral issue. I think that Solomon did what he did because it showed the morality of course, she's a prostitute and that's a judgmental thing right there. But I think he was trying to show it's a morality issue because the woman smothered her own son and she could care less about human life. And that's why he decided that's the wisdom.
Good, Sherry. Good. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think that the proof here is to see who is the one who is the more ethical, in addition to the one who apparently, at least according to the story, has a greater, love for the child
Or
than the.
compassion and morality. That's
Yeah.
what I learned from that story as a kid.
Good. Yeah.
It
I mean-
is very interesting. I mean, I know the reason they're sort of marked as prostitutes is so that there aren't men's interests involved in the story. That's one thing.
Oh,
But also it's curious that it also underscores that, prostitutes can be really good mothers. Okay, which is, that's never really talked about as one of the factors in the story. But
mhm.
it is very interesting because it is, it certainly doesn't map on sort of attitudes today about prostitution.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, there could have been other alternatives, and this is the one that he chose. And it's very dramatic. Okay, take the sword, and sort of like Abraham about to put the knife into his kid's chest, right? It's very dramatic. It's very sort of suspenseful. Like, ooh, what's going to happen? He's going to cut the kid in half. And of course, if you don't know Solomon, you think, oh, maybe he's really going to do this. So it's a good story. Right? It may not be the.
Did anyone's parents use that expression, oh, give me the wisdom of Solomon? And my mother used to invoke it periodically. When one kid was saying, your piece is bigger than mine. And, she says, what, do I have to practice the wisdom of Solomon here? I mean, it was hilarious.
Harvey?
Yeah, I was wondering today, and later in the New Testament, they make prostitutes into a negative, and so far in the Tanakh, it doesn't seem like prostitution's considered bad, because we've had a prostitute earlier on who wasn't really a prostitute, but the fellow thought she was a prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
Well, remember when Joshua goes to
Right.
conquer the land of Canaan, and there's a prostitute at the gate who hides the two spies and then helps them later on and all of that.
Yeah.
We read that in the book of Joshua.
Right.
So yeah, they're not, although interestingly enough, Robert Alter translates it as two whore women.
Oh, nice.
I mean, I don't know, that seems a little pejorative, no?
Yeah. When did it become a negative? I mean, it seems like the prostitute's kind of a neutral thing up until this point. And then later it became a negative. And when did that change?
Jane has an answer. Go ahead.
Okay. The attitude really changes when Christianity gets recognized as the official religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine. And that's when you get this first set of redactions of what the New Testament is going to look like. It was at the Council of Nicaea. where they, the prelates, the major prelates, starting with the Bishop of Rome, who becomes the Pope, they make the decision of what is going to be included in the New Testament and what is not. So we're talking about the 4th century AD, 324 AD.
Well, I think that, I mean, there were,
But also you have, let me just think of the way I want to say this without being insulting. Jesus is the new covenant, okay? And therefore, even earlier than this council as to what's going to be included in the New Testament, one of the things that you have is this extreme asceticism, because you have that whole monastic movement that starts in Egypt about 100 AD. And there's a rejection of essential bodily urges in Christianity.
yeah,
And one of the legends is, of course, is that Jesus never married, which would have been very unusual for a 33-year-old Jewish man in that period of time. But there is a very strong anti-sexual attitude in Christianity. And it makes sense because until Christianity really had to make an agreement and an accord with the Roman Empire, it was anti-Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire is just like us right now. I mean, as a historian, it's almost like action for action, where you're seeing the breakup of this empire. And one of the things that surfaces very fast is the lack of morality on many different levels.
so, there are a number of prostitutes that we've encountered. So there's, Rahab up in the book of Joshua, who helps the guys come in and take over the land. There's the one, well, Judah thinks that Tamar is a prostitute, remember, and he sleeps with her. And so, and frankly, Delilah is sort of a prostitute as well. As somebody said, that's the way you could make a living as a woman if you were single, right? And take care of yourself. I don't think there's huge judgment. They're obviously not the cream of society. So maybe even the idea that prostitutes would come before the king for a judgment is even more important, that it's not, the royalty coming to the king or, the top level of society coming for decisions, that he's even willing to judge between two prostitutes, who are, at the lower end of the totem pole in society. Christine, go ahead.
Well, the prostitute, even in Christianity, really becomes very class-based judgmental, because within the working classes, it was not so much of a stigma. People knew that you had to do what you had to do to get by. And so even in 19th century London, when you had all the moralist movements, the fallen woman and within the working classes, this was not a barrier to later marriage. It was not a barrier to having a status within your community. It was a fact of life. And so one of the things that you find, there was a journal kept by a literate sailor on Cook's voyages named Samwell. And he talks about how the other, some of the other sailors the legendary, oh my God, we landed in Polynesia, we're in heaven. Okay, so because there was no stigma to premarital sex in most of the cultures. And he says in the journal, of course, the ship's doctor and the captain think of these women as prostitutes, but but they gave freely of themselves. And if they took our shirts and our and our iron nails. So what? So there's no negative judgment about this. And he said, most of us left the islands with nothing. But so the working classes really had a very, very different view of what the upper classes called prostitution.
Also, Rabbi, wasn't there a strong asceticism in the Qumran community?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's even before Christianity. So Judaism also has it.
Although asceticism is not really a Jewish value. I mean, there was a
Yeah.
sect that was at the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
I think it's the Essenes.
Yeah.
But and there is that one little chapter in the Torah about a Nazir taking a vow of chastity and of asceticism, but that's really not sort of a mainstream Jewish thing.
Weren't they expecting the end of the world? Wasn't there going to be?
That was their vision. Yeah, their vision was
a giant fight between good and evil,
Right,
and the world
right.
was going to change.
Yeah, well, that was their vision, right?
Yeah.
But it generally, Judaism wants you to enjoy the world.
Life.
Yes, and the whole idea of God asking you when you go up for your final judgment, did you enjoy the fruits of my world, and why not if you didn't, right?
Yeah.
So you're not supposed to deny yourself in Judaism. That's really not you're not aspiring to that as the highest level.
Yeah, that's Calvinism.
Okay, so
one last thing. Even within early Catholicism, right? The Gnostic heresies, one of the things about the Gnostic heresies was just an embrace of sexuality in general.
Mhm.
And that was one of the.
No wonder they were heretical.
Well, no wonder my mother would have been burned at the stake.
Oh my God. Okay, so let's go to the next chapter. Now, we're not going to read through the next chapter because what it is, it's just a list of names. Okay, all his high officials,
Wow.
and what Alter says about this is that it shows the composite nature of this section of the Bible, because you had the ascent to the throne of King Solomon, then you have this sort of dream vision of him asking for wisdom, then you have this folk tale about these two prostitutes. Now you have just basically a listing of all his officials, right, all across the whole country. And now interestingly, it says here that Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of choice flour and 60 cores of meal. It's 10 fat oxen and 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you see that there's a lot of stuff that needs to be given to this king, okay, and to all his officers. For he had dominion over all the region west of the Euphrates, which Solomon says is unlikely because, where does he say this? Wait a second, I wrote it down someplace. Wait a minute. He said it's unlikely that it was that wide. But anyway, so there's a lot of stuff that has to be given to this king. What does that mean in terms of the regular population?
They're taxed.
Exactly. So in order for all of these things to be given, see, well, it says also Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank, were happy, etc. And he was sovereign over all kingdoms from the Euphrates to the land of Philistines, even to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. So you have, this vast, vast empire, which is probably not accurate in terms of real life, but okay. And, there's a lot of feeding to be done of these, officials who are reigning across the country, and of Solomon and his family, and etc. So heavy, heavy taxation. And actually we'll see also corvée, where people have to work to, turn in this produce.
Mhm.
And during Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel lived in safety from Dan even to Beersheba, all of them under their vines of fig trees. That's the sort of, idyllic notion of how peace will be reigning. Solomon also had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. And those officials supplied provisions for King Solomon. And for all who came to King Solomon's table, each one in his month, they let nothing be lacking. They also brought to the required place barley and straw for the horses. Now you have all those horses, you got to feed them too. So this is exactly, I'm going to find this for you so I can share it. This is exactly what Samuel had warned.
Right?
In,
Oh, yeah.
If you give a king, if you want a king, this is what comes with it.
Yeah.
okay, so I want to show you. Here it is. So here they're asking for a king. They're asking Solomon for a king, right?
Yeah.
And Solomon says, this is what's going to happen to you if you want a king, right? Verse 11. These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your field and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks and you shall be his slaves. And that on that day, you'll cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you that day. So here are some of the things that Samuel warned them about. Remember in the book of Deuteronomy, what was the king's major function? What was the king supposed to do in Deuteronomy?
Was it storing stuff for times of need or something?
That would
like
be
that?
nice if that's what he was supposed to do. He was supposed to
That's
write
what it
down
teaches
a
you.
Torah. He was supposed to write a scroll of Torah. That was his main function,
Mhm.
to remember the law. Okay, now,
Yeah.
and then this is only just the beginning, because now we're going to have the building of the palace and the temple, which will require even more money and even more work. Go ahead, Christine.
Yeah, I just would, I'm just, whenever they have lists of names, like endless lists of names, what this one does is emphasize that his advisors are coming from all over the kingdom, not just his close family members, not just people that are around him. Usually, it basically is a sort of message to the populace that, he's representing all of these people.
Yeah.
And also, P.S., it also makes it harder to have a conspiracy. Because these people
Okay,
are coming
now,
from
let me-
very
I wanna
different places.
I want to share something else, which is from Deuteronomy, to
Yeah.
show you also what, they should have known better. All right. So when you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, etc. You may not put a foreigner, okay. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself. What did we just see? Lots and lots of horses.
Yeah.
Cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself. We're going to see that Solomon is going to have lots and lots of wives, lest his heart turn away. Hello. Nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of the law, this law, approved by the Levitical priests. Okay, and it shall be with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. So These are things he's not supposed to do. These are things he's supposed to do. And we see that the king, you know, I don't remember seeing Solomon writing a Torah scroll, but he did acquire a lot of horses, and he acquired a lot of wives, and he acquired a lot of silver, and he got people working really hard for taking care of all his treasures. Christine.
Well, there's a good reason why horses were looked askance at in this kind of thing. The people who usually kept horses were usually nomadic, because the horses are devastating on the environment. And this is a desert. So the animals that people keep usually in a desert are either sheep or goats, which are, scavenger browsers, right? They could eat anything. And horses are persnickety, and they eat the same food supply that people eat, the grains and so on and so forth. So it's an emblem of real wealth, unless you're really nomadic and can, take the animals around, and they can sort of periodically deplete an area and then you move.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, if you want to be friends with the people, you don't keep horses.
Okay, well, they were warned, and they chose to a king, and we'll see what the results of all of this is going to be. Okay, so any other comments before we move on to the end of this chapter? All right, here we go. Just last few things. Jane, you want to pick it up here?
Oh, okay. God gave Solomon very great wisdom, discernment, and breadth of understanding, as vast as the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Kakol, and Darda, children of Mahal. His fame spread throughout all the surrounding nations. He composed 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He would speak of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows in the wall. He would speak of animals and birds and reptiles and fish. People came from all the nations to hear the wisdom of Solomon, from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom.
So, this idea that he would speak of trees, etc., is that he's completely knowledgeable in every aspect of nature, the flora and the fauna, right? And he's wiser than anyone else. This is very folktale-ish, right? Very different from how David was portrayed. David being portrayed very much as a human being. Yes, Lynn.
I think I'm getting confused on where we're at. I'm looking in the book, Bible, and the chapters and the numbering don't seem to be matching what I'm seeing.
Yes, there's slight, I think the way some of the Christian Bibles are numbered is a little bit different, just in terms, there are a few verses that are like off, but where are you? What are you looking at?
Well, that's what I've been trying to figure out.
We're in chapter 4.
4, okay, because 4, the book I'm looking at ends with verse 20, and they've got 29, 30, no, 32, I forgot now, but.
Yeah, same with.
Oh, you know what? We were at, wait a minute.
In
You know what?
chapter 5, it doesn't quite work
You
either.
know what? We were starting in chapter 5. Yeah, actually, let me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were in
Just
chapter
a lot
5.
of chapter 5 then, it looks like.
Well, let me just look here.
There's verses.
You know what? Yes, what's interesting? This, when I said we're not going to read chapter 4, it's because in the altar book, chapter 4 ends there. At the end of this, list of officials.
The numbering is very different.
Yes, and his chapter 5 starts with Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines. Yeah, this is where chapter 5 begins for, I guess.
20.
Yeah, and this one, for some reason, we're not at chapter 5 yet, even though other books have it at chapter 5. So the divisions are different in different places. Yeah, it makes it very annoying, because I actually got myself a little confused too, because when it said the thing about Euphrates, I knew he had said the Euphrates, it was unlikely that that's as far as the kingdom went.
Yeah.
But there was no Euphrates in chapter
Yeah, in the book
4,
I'm
and I was
looking at,
like,
yeah,
what am I? Yeah,
the Jewish Study Bible,
Yeah.
beginning of chapter 5 is Solomon's rule extended over all the kingdom.
you're right. Yes. I mean, and the Jewish, the chapter and verses in any event is a Christian
Yeah, yeah,
thing.
usually
But
they're close.
yeah, you're right. It's, that's what got me confused also, because I thought, wait a minute, how come there's all this other stuff in chapter 4 when I thought it was just the list of officials? And then now that you pointed that out, I see that, my book is different as well.
So where in the Jewish
We're actually
Bible,
in
where are we
chapter,
at?
we are in chapter 5. And I had all these notes also for chapter 5, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, we just read all that, but.
The
we're
way
in
I
chapter
look at
4.
it, the verse 6 we covered about the
No, you're right. You're right.
12,000, and then after that, no.
He starts with King Hiram of Tyre is the
Right.
beginning of chapter 5 here, but yeah, you're correct that it's divided differently, which is very odd. And so, but I do want to go back to this, because chapter 4 in my book as well ends right here with all the listing of all of these officials. But I want to mention a few things here in what in our books is chapter 5. So again, the river Euphrates, very unlikely that that's as far as his kingdom went. That's up here. And I have verse 11, but of course it's a different verse here. Let me see. It's he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite. So that's down here. Ethan the Ezrahite. Okay, these are court poets that are being mentioned here. Just they're temple poets.
Oh,
Bible, where are we?
Well, look at the screen. Ethan the Ezrahite right
I'm
here.
trying to find it here.
It's verse 11 in the in chapter 5 of the other book. You see verse 11?
Okay, so that's what we're in. Okay, 5. Okay.
Okay, so all these guys here are temple poets, okay? So they would be the best poets in the country.
Okay.
All right, and then writing Proverbs. Remember, the Proverbs are supposed to be written by King Solomon. And Proverbs are supposed to be the epitome of wisdom. And then, as I mentioned, the whole realm of nature is mentioned here.
Okay.
Do you see where that is in your book?
Yeah. So
Okay.
we're in. So that part's ending verse 14.
Yeah. Now, verse 15 is the beginning of chapter 5 in this version. Don't ask me why it's so confusing, but it is. This is the first time this has happened, actually. I mean, sometimes there's 1 or 2 verses that are off. Like you'd say verse 16 is really verse 17, whatever, but here the division is completely different. I don't know why.
Yeah, I was just getting confused where we're at.
Yeah, you know what? I read the ahead of time, I read the altar. So my notes are about the chapters as he's divided them, and then it's different from this. Okay, so now the king of Tyre is in your book, verse 15. Okay. You're all right.
Yeah.
Great. Anybody else confused? Okay, so we're Jane, you want to pick this
yeah,
up?
sure. Now King Hiram of Tyre sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that they had anointed him king in place of his father, for Hiram had always been a friend to David. Solomon sent word to Hiram saying, "You know that my father David could not build a house for the name of the Lord his God because of the warfare with which his enemies surrounded him, until he put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune. So I intend to build a house for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord said to my father David, your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, shall build the house for my name. Therefore command that cedars from the Lebanon be cut for me. My servants will join your servants, and I will give you whatever wages you set for your servants. For you know that there is no one among us who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians.
Okay, let me just mention, Tyre is the capital of Phoenicia. Okay, or the principal city. And Sidon is also a city of Phoenicia, and that area is now Lebanon. The cedars of Lebanon, you've probably heard that. That's sort of a famous expression. So apparently they grow very well in that area, not so much in Israel or in Canaan. And he's, it's interesting. It says, I'm building a house for God, as God has said to my father. Of course, it doesn't explain why David was not allowed to build the temple, which was because of all the blood on his hands, which, I suppose was something that was necessary to create this kingdom. But, things are quiet enough now that, he can take time to do all this building project. And it's going to cost even more money, right? In importing these trees and getting them cut up into planks and all of that. Yes, Christine.
The cedars of Lebanon are famous because the climatic conditions are such that they grow straighter than cedars in other parts of the Near East.
Oh, interesting.
So instead of all gnarly and having lots of knots and things like that, they're really beautiful for building ships and things like that.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very interesting information. Okay, so let's leave. Okay, go ahead.
When Hiram heard the words of Solomon, he rejoiced greatly and said, Blessed be the Lord today, who has given to David a wise son to be over this great people. Hiram sent word to Solomon, I have heard the message that you have sent to me. I will fulfill all your needs in the matter of cedar and cypress timber. My servant shall bring it down to the sea from the Lebanon. I will make it into rafts to go by sea to the place you will indicate. I will have them broken up there for you to take away, and you shall meet my needs by providing food for my household. So Hiram supplied Solomon's every need for timber of cedar and cypress. Solomon, in turn, gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household and 20 cores of fine oil. Solomon gave this to Hiram year by year. So the Lord gave Solomon wisdom as he had promised him. There was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. So are these extra taxes then?
Oh, sure. Remember, there were all the horses and all the officials and all these people and his lavish lifestyle to which he had accustomed himself. And now we've got a whole new thing going on here, two massive building projects, the temple and the palace. So he's going to need more money to pay for all these supplies, and then he's going to need more labor. And we will see that in the next verse right here.
Oh, that's the Corvette. Okay, King Solomon conscripted forced labor out of all Israel. The levy numbered 30,000 men. He sent them to the Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. They would be a month in the Lebanon and 2 months at home. Adoniram was in charge of the forced labor. Solomon also had 70,000 laborers and 80,000 stone cutters in the hill country. Besides Solomon's 3,300 supervisors who were over the work, having charge of the people who did the work. At the king's command, they quarried out great costly stones in order to lay the foundation of the house with dressed stones. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the Gibeonites did the stone cutting and prepared the timber and the stone to build the house. This reminds me of the Hebrews in Egypt. They're still stone cutting.
Good. That's excellent. No, really, because
Yeah.
the
It's the
fair,
same labor. And it's corvée, it's forced labor.
Exactly. And remember that the pharaohs had big building projects as well, right? They were building the pyramids, etc. So yes, it's very, very reminiscent, which is not a good thing. And, you know, I mean, all the stones that have to be cut and the timber that has to be cut and, you know, first cut down and then, you know, made into planks and then hauled over, you know, to Canaan. I mean, it's a lot of work, a lot of people. Yeah, Christine.
It's wicked clever to have building the rafts out of the stuff that you're going to be using after it gets to the destination.
Yeah.
In order to float all the stuff in.
Very
But
efficient.
corvée is, yeah, I mean, state formation is all corvée. You know, if they don't snatch your land away, it's corvée all the way down to the turtles, because the Inca always were proud to point out to the people that they had not taken their land. What they did was put corvée to task to build more terraced agricultural land, and all of the stuff from that extra third of land was destined for the capital city.
Right, right. Well,
but
so
they never touched their land, you know.
Well, here, you know, it's corvée and it's taxes, and taxes in the form of food and cattle and all of that stuff, right? To feed people, to feed the king, to feed his retinue. So this is exactly what Samuel predicted, and it's coming true, and it's not going to do very well in the end as far as the kingdom hanging together. We won't get there until next year, but we will see the conditions that are being set for the kingdom to split apart. Okay, so let's see what comes next. I think we might be closer to the books being the same. Is this the beginning of your chapter 6? Lynn, it's my beginning. In Altar, it's the same.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, so now we're back on track. Good. Jane, you want to keep going?
Sure. In the 480th year, after the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. The house that King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. The vestibule in front of the nave of the house was 20 cubits wide across the width of the house. Its depth was 10 cubits in front of the house. For the house he made windows with recessed frames. He also built a structure against the wall of the house, running around the walls of the house, both the nave and the inner sanctuary, and he made 6 chambers all around. The lowest story was 5 cubits wide, the middle one was 6 cubits wide, and the third one was 7 cubits wide. For around the outside of the house, he made offsets on the wall in order that the supporting beams should not be inserted into the walls of the house.
Okay, so let's go through this. So first of all, the 480 years, it's from multiplying 12 by 40, which are 2 formulaic numbers, right? Which is why in the book, the Exodus is based on when, I mean, the way the book, the Torah, figures out when the Exodus is happening is based on these numbers, which are unrealistic numbers. They're sort of idealized numbers of 12 times 40. 12, like 12 tribes, 12 months of the year, 40 years in the desert, all of that stuff. Ziv is a Phoenician month. And then, a cubit is like the length of from your elbow to the tip of your hand. Of course, we all have different lengths, but in any event, that's pretty much what a cubit is. And so apparently this is not a very big temple. Because the Chartres Cathedral in France is 3 times bigger than this. So it's a small temple, just FYI. It says, we're going to get to the stones, but let me just tell you ahead of time. It says whole stones, so no hammers are used. And that is similar to what the instructions are for the altar in the book of Exodus, that are hewn stones. Okay, and any questions about this so far? No. Okay, keep going, please. Let me just move the,
Okay.
yeah.
The house was built with stone, finished at the quarry, so that neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron was heard in the temple while it was being built.
So why no axe or hammer or tool of iron?
It makes it more mystical.
Okay, this is a more practical reason also why you're not supposed to use nails in a coffin.
Are those items of war? The axe?
Exactly. Metal is, you know, what rifles and bullets and things like that are made. I mean, they didn't have rifles in those days, but I mean, weapons of war are made out of metal. So no metal for the temple, no metal for coffins that we put into the ground. It's supposed to be just a plain wooden box, pine wood. Yeah, Christine.
A cubit is approximately half a yard.
Okay, thank you.
Just much easier to remember that way.
Okay, well, I remember it based on my arm, so. Especially because I went to a French school and we never learned about yards and miles and things. We did meters and whatever. Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah. The entrance for the lower story was on the south side of the house. One went up by winding stairs to the middle story, and from the middle story to the third. So he built the house and finished it. He roofed the house with beams and planks of cedar. He built the structure against the whole house, each story 5 cubits high, and it was joined to the house with timbers of cedar. Now the word of the Lord came to Solomon. Concerning this house that you are building, if you walk in my statutes, obey my ordinances, and keep all my commandments by walking in them, then I will establish my promise with you that I made to your father David. I will dwell among the Israelites and not forsake my people Israel. So Solomon built the house and finished it. He lined the walls of the house on the inside with boards of cedar. From the floor of the house to the rafters of the ceiling. He covered them on the inside with wood, and he covered the floor of the house with boards of cypress. He built 20 cubits of the rear of the house with boards of cedar from the floor to the rafters, and he built this within an inner sanctuary as the most holy place. The house, that is the nave in front of the inner sanctuary, was 40 cubits long. The cedar within the house had carvings of gourds and open flowers. All was cedar, no stone was seen. The inner sanctuary he prepared in the innermost part of the house, to set there the ark of the covenant of the Lord. The interior of the inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 20 cubits high. He overlaid it with pure gold. He also overlaid the altar with cedar. Solomon overlaid the inside of the house with pure gold. Then he drew chains of gold across in front of the inner sanctuary and overlaid it with gold. Next, he overlaid the whole house with gold in order that the whole house might be perfect. Even the whole altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary, he overlaid with gold.
Okay, so now notice all the wood. So it looks like what he did was cedar paneling was everywhere, right? What do you think that's going to do for this building?
Cedar smells good.
It does. But what are the risks of having?
It's gonna burn. It's gonna burn.
Yes, exactly. It's going to burn eventually. And, you know, all this wood just makes it very flammable, right? So even though it'll smell good and look good, it won't be maybe the best material to use for this. And then, of course, all this gold is going to cost a lot of money. It's going to be very pretty, but there's going to be a price to pay for it.
It seems to me that anytime someone acquires power, they have to also surround themselves with an entourage and build these edifices to themselves that result in the potentially middle class of Israel being poor.
Yep.
You know, and so it's like a formula for failure. And I guess the question I have is, why would God have not, in addition to making Solomon wise about splitting babies, have given him a little lesson in economics?
But that's a very excellent question. If he's so wise, why is he doing this to his people, right? Because you could be very wise and still be power hungry, right?
Because it's not a sustainable business model,
right? Absolutely.
And and then the final thing is, like, there's so much about idolatry in the Old Testament, and all this gold and cedar, blah blah blah, is sort of a form of adultery. It's like people who have to have the big Mar-a-Lago estate in disgusting South Florida. But it is surprising and kind of disappointing that there's not more reference to equity.
Well, again, I think one of the great things about the Bible is that it doesn't pretend that you've got any human beings here that aren't real human beings, right? Whether it's Abraham lying about his wife being his sister, or David committing adultery and murder, or whatever. These are real people, even if some of the language makes it sound like they're superheroes on some level, like, oh, this guy's following God's statutes. Well, so I mean, that's the beauty of this. It gives you a blueprint for everything that happens later on. I mean, is there anything new in history than what we've read in the Bible? I don't think so. I mean, the weaponry is different in war, and we have, cell phones and computers, but human beings haven't changed. But I mean, that's a good point. His wisdom could have served him in a better way than whether or not he should chop up babies. So by the way, the temple is based on a Phoenician temple design. So you have to be very aware of the fact that Judaism, or the biblical religion in this case, is very syncretic. It does pull from the surrounding cultures. It's not like this is some original design that Solomon came up with in his brain. He's getting cedars of Lebanon, and he's building the temple according to how a Phoenician temple was built. Influence of the local culture, right? Any other comments? I mean, that was a good comment, Melissa, because yes, I
guess what's disappointing to me is, you're constantly looking for role models or models that one could apply. And, yes, some of these guys were good, but the bad side of them was really to the extreme. And I appreciate the point that, well, this goes to show that everyone's human and God still accepts them. But I can't think of very many of the men that we have been learning about who are worth emulating. Maybe some of the women, Ruth wasn't half bad, but what I'm saying is, it's just like, really, you're just the same as Putin.
Well, listen, right now, when I look at what's going on in this country, I think this feels like Germany in the 30s, even though I wasn't there. And we know where this leads. Why are we just letting it happen? You could arguably say in the 30s, people didn't know what it was going to lead to, but we really do know. And we keep repeating history. As I've said, the first time I read the Bible, I thought, oh my God, nothing's changed.
Yeah.
Why can't we learn? Why can't we learn? We're supposed to be adaptable animals that learn, but we don't. Go ahead, Christine.
Because the pursuit of power always involves all of these things.
Yeah.
And if you live in pursuit of power, this is what happens.
Unfortunately,
yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, when you are the king of this vast empire, which again is exaggerated, I don't think it went as far as the Euphrates, et cetera, but you have control over all these people, and people are going to do your bidding. gee, that's powerful. What can I do with all that power? I think I'll,
Well, you could do some good.
yeah.
You know, you could provide healthcare and a good quality of life for people. And so to me, it's so simplistic to say, well, we're just assholes and we've been assholes for 5,000 years, so nothing should change, you know? And I think things should change. And the only comment I have about Israel, Germany in the 30s is I don't think we're in quite such a bad economic state
That's true.
as
Yes.
Israel was, as Germany was after World War I reparations. I mean, people were very poor. Of course, people were poor everywhere in the world. And what bothers me even more, though, is just how Israel, after all of these years of getting Israel back, is not doing a very good job of developing values and structures that are going to be sustainable on the long run.
Absolutely. I mean, and when you think, you know, like Israel today was built on all these ideals, and it was
Yes.
about equality and all of that. And look what's happened. Jane, I see you're really eager to say something.
I'm just wondering why we want and why we're looking for these leaders to be different than any other leaders of their time. Why should a Jew, just because you're a Jew, doesn't mean that you're going to be this exemplary example? So why are we asking Solomon to be different, to build a different kind of temple?
Well, when you think about, okay, there's this Torah that has these ethical values that we're supposed to be living by, and it doesn't seem like, you know, and God over and over again says to Solomon, if you follow in my ways, you know, and observe my statutes.
Mm-hmm.
But
there's nothing in the Torah that says don't build a temple with walls lined of gold. There's nothing in the Torah that says don't build a temple made out of the cedars of Lebanon.
No, but it does say, you know, every 7 years is a Shemitah year, and every, 50 years is a Jubilee year.
That's done.
Yeah, well, but meantime, all these people are having to be subjected to a corvée and heavy taxation in order to make these building projects possible. So maybe one thinks about the consequences, no?
I still see that kind of
I don't see
opulence.
them as being iconoclastic. I really don't. I mean, we've been, dumping on them, but to me, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to build these temples. He's supposed to build a temple. He's supposed to build a palace. He's supposed to maintain friendly relationships with everyone around him. So he has 1,000 wives. He's doing exactly. He's following the rules as far as I'm concerned. He's doing exactly what he's supposed to.
Okay, Christine.
But these are the rules of statescraft, not being a human being, not being a humane being. And
but you can't
and if you look at
Solomon's not human.
It's not, no, but if this were not a book that is about the formation of states, the Bible does that. I mean, this is how states come to be and what is intrinsic to them. But it's not intrinsic to human nature, because thank God we have some places around the planet that never had and rejected, not because they couldn't do states, but because they saw them and rejected them. And I'm thinking of the ballet on the west coast of Africa, which was formed by everybody fleeing states around them. Mm-hmm. And they became a people that rejected even chiefship. They only had achievement hierarchies, and those were ephemeral and so on and so forth. And nobody could command one another. So, and they built beautiful buildings and so on and so forth, but it wasn't coercive. Okay, because nobody was pursuing power. And in fact, they had the experience of being corveyed and all the rest of this stuff. And it's why the British had a devil of a time trying to bring them into an imperial relationship. Because, and so did the French, because these people had centuries of practice resisting states.
So you know what, I'm going to stop.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I just want to stop this for one, just because we're kind of running out of time, and I just want to finish this chapter. I think this is a fascinating discussion, And, you know, if we have a couple of minutes at the end, we can resume it. I just want to try to finish this one chapter because then we're off for a couple of months, okay? So,
Sorry.
no, but no, your points are very well taken. You know, your points are very well taken. You know,
We'll continue
we-
this Monday, Christine. We're having lunch.
We have like 12-hour lunches.
I can't imagine why. Okay, let's try to finish this chapter, okay? And then we can resume the discussion. Who's reading this, Jane?
So am I up to 23?
Yeah.
Yeah. If in the inner sanctuary, he made two cherubim of olive wood, each 10 cubits high.
All right, let me just explain what these guys are. Remember the cherubim who are guarding Eden to not allow anybody to come back. Okay, they're not cute little babies with puffy cheeks, right?
Mhm.
They're kind of terrifying looking winged creatures. And it's borrowing from Canaanite mythology. And these fierce looking creatures are God's mounts. This is what God is riding on. And you've got the cherubim here because, you know, that's what is guarding heaven and sort of a reflection of what's going on in heaven. Okay.
Okay. 5 cubits was the length of one wing of the cherub, and 5 cubits the length of the other wing of the cherub. It was 10 cubits from the tip of one wing to the tip of the other. The other cherub also measured 10 cubits. Both cherubim had the same measure and the same form. The height of one cherub was 10 cubits, and so was that of the other cherub. He put the cherubim in the innermost part of the house. The wings of the cherubim were spread out so that a wing of one was touching the one wall and a wing of the other cherub was touching the other wall. Their other wings towards the center of the house were touching wing to wing. He also overlaid the cherubim with gold.
Of course, right?
Oh, want me to go on? Okay.
Yeah, I just said of course, because gold is
Okay.
everywhere.
He carved the walls of the house all around about with the carved engravings of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers in the inner and outer rooms. The floor of the house he overlaid with gold in the inner and outer rooms. For the entrance to the inner sanctuary, he made doors of olive wood. The lintel and the doorposts were 5-sided. He covered the 2 doors of olive wood with carvings of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. He overlaid them with gold and spread gold on the cherubim and on the palm trees. So also he made for the entrance to the nave doorposts of olive wood, 4-sided each, and 2 doors of cypress wood. The 2 leaves of the one door were folding, and the 2 leaves of the other door were folding. He carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, overlaying them with gold evenly applied upon the carved work. He built the inner court with 3 courses of dressed stone to 1 course of cedar beams. In the 4th year, the foundation of the house was laid in the month of Ziv. In the 11th year, in the month of Wool, which is the 8th month, the house was finished in all its parts and according to all its specifications. He was 7 years in building it. I have a question, Rabbi. Why aren't they using Jewish calendar? Why aren't they using Jewish?
Question. Well, you know, these are Phoenician months and it's based on the Phoenician temple and is using Phoenician wood. And I don't know, he seems to be very influenced by the Phoenicians. Christine?
Well, the architects are Phoenician and the schedule was probably according to their construction plans. You know, you don't argue with your contractor.
They also don't use, he also in the Hebrew does not use the term for month, which is Chodesh. He uses Yareach, which means moon. So yeah, it seems like, you know, Solomon has all these, I'm sure he has a few Phoenician wives too. So he's sort of plunged into Phoenician culture at this point. you know, again, the cherubim and all of this stuff is very influenced by other cultures. It's not, you know, necessarily the Israelite culture.
So I have a question.
Yes.
You know how in Exodus, they have the long, boring chapters about how to build the
Yes.
temple.
Yeah.
Does this temple look like that temple? I mean, they went into excruciating detail about everything that needed to go into the original tabernacle. Is it the tabernacle or the temple?
Well, the movable tabernacle. Yeah.
Yeah, I see. And so did this have
I think
anything?
I think so. I think so. Let me look up. Let's see. That would be at the end of the book of Exodus.
I mean, talk about having architectural plans. I mean,
Yeah, no, it's really not the most scintillating. Okay, here's
now it's all supposed to be about how mindfulness and detail matter.
okay, this is
Rabbi, it can wait
yeah.
until next, you know, after the summer, but do you have a picture of what the tabernacle looked like?
Yeah, I can find that.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
you can do it next.
No, it's easy enough. It's easy enough to find a picture because here's one. Let's see.
There's usually one right in the Bible, right in it.
Yeah, I'm gonna share with you the where'd it go now? Here it is. Now I have to make it bigger because you probably won't be able to see much of this.
Oh, there it is. Mm.
I was trying to just focus on the see down here, that's the tabernacle. There we are.
Oh, nice.
So more, I don't want more details. I don't want all that stuff. Oh well. So that's, I mean, the temple obviously is much more elaborate. What is important here is like the Holy of Holies and the
Torah house.
altar. Yeah. And so they have to make the furnishings. I mean, a lot of the details of the tabernacle in the book of Exodus are really about this. Let's see if there's more. There we go.
Is that what they dug up? Is that where they got that picture?
Oh, no, I think they got the picture from the description.
Oh, okay. Because they're like little people.
Oh, look, see here, now these cherubs look nicer than the ones I think that are described, but this is sort of this is what is described in Exodus, right? With the cherubim with the wings facing each other and everything. So that, I think that's what they did on the interior. The exterior is only just this dimension here. And I'd have to compare them to see if they're the same. But again, you see, it's not that big. In fact, in my Bible class, we actually went outside with chalk and drew the whole thing based on the measurements in the book of Exodus. But this is all based on what's in the book of Exodus. So we haven't gotten to all these things here, you know, all the implements on the inside, on the altar and everything. That would have been, I'm sure, very similar to what's in the. That's not very easy to see. Oh, there we are. There's a church.
There's
right.
the steeple.
And why is it so unclear?
Ooh.
Oh, there we are.
Yeah.
I think that's a church that's trying to look like that. Yeah. Anyway, so stop share. It won't stop sharing. There we go.
I still think all the golden stuff in Solomon's temple sounds like Trump's toilets. I mean, it's like,
Thank you.
you know, it's just like really, and imagine what it was like to clean that. But, and I guess
with the papers stuck in the papers and stuffed in there.
But I meant the temple gold, not Trump's toilet. You know, but you know, it just seems like, you know, we ought to do better. And some people do. I mean, you look at Gandhi, he had a form of power which he used for good. I can think of a few historic figures, emphasis on the few, but it was all.
Well, you know, I think as somebody pointed out, Jane or Christine or both, you know, you want to create a country that's going to be stable, right? Mm-hmm. You've got all these enemies surrounding you because, again, Canaan is between these two big empires. And so you make all these deals with all of these different kings and you marry their daughters. And you also, I think on some level, have to show how powerful you are by the beauty of your buildings. And, you know, you have to make compromises, and you know, if you had an idyllic society right there, I mean, it would be lovely, but it would probably be taken over in 10 minutes. And you
Well,
need an army.
You need an
Go ahead.
army, but if you weren't wasting so many people, so much money on you know, kitschy stuff, you would have more money to pay soldiers. And I hear you. I mean, these are all of the trappings of power and wealth. They signify power and wealth, but they don't necessarily create a good society.
No.
And I just think there have to be ways to protect yourself without the opulence, which, you know, is so in some ways lower class. I mean, I hate to say it, but it really, you know, you look at how people live now who are in the 0.01%, not the 0.1%. And it's, you know, it's sort of like tacky. So anyhow, enough on poor Solomon. I'm picking on him way too much. So,
Oh, what are you showing us, Christine? Wait a minute. Hang on. Let me.
Okay, I'm showing what the cherubim would have looked like with their wingtips touching the walls and in the center, and the approximate size that would have been.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's supposed
so
to be a human being in the middle.
Yeah, the description in Exodus is primarily of, like, you know, the Holy of Holies, although there's also the stuff that you have to create in order to make it a movable sanctuary, right? And all the poles that had to be created.
Right. But that gives the wingtips spread across is the width of the room.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Harvey says temple reminds me of a Faraday cage. I don't know what a Faraday.
What is that?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's the drawing, you mean, with all the little strips, you know, coming off that lithograph thing. Faraday cage they had one in the Museum of Science in Boston, which is that it is a cage where it's designed to diffuse lightning. So you can sit in the middle of a Faraday cage and they can have a bolt of lightning hitting the top, and it diffuses it into the ground so you don't get killed.
Interesting. Okay.
Steve is like an encyclopedia of interesting facts. It must have been great.
It's why I can't remember anybody's name.
That's all right. That's a sign of really superior intelligence, you know, like not remembering people's names.
Tell it to me the next time I'm trying to think of a noun at 11 o'clock at night.
Well, this has been a great discussion, and we're ending on a slightly cynical note, but then again, you know, that's life.
That's the Bible.
When do we come back?
I'm working on the schedule right now. I think it'll be October because we have high holidays in September. We have Slichot on the 18th. And then we have, and by the way, for Slichot, we're going to have Dr. Rick Landis and his daughter, Rachel Heslin, who are going to be talking about forgiveness. Of course, that's what Slichot is all about. And then we have high holidays. So until the end of the high holidays, I don't think we're going to do Torah study. But I think, anyway, I'll send out the schedule when I have it. I haven't finished it. But, you know, the fall already has lots of adult ed scheduled.
Yeah.
So, you know, and then the winter we'll talk about God, I think.
So Rabbi, where are you vacationing?
Well, I'm going to go to Israel to the Hartman Institute to study. And the week before, my nephew, who's going on Birthright, is going to join me, and we're going to explore the West Bank, among other things, which is what he wants me to take him to.
Interesting.
So, yeah, he wants to get the other side.
Do you do Instagram, or do you send photos back to those of us in Riverside?
Facebook. That's the only social media I do is Facebook. I don't do Instagram or any of the other stuff. I'll tell you why, because with Instagram, mainly it's likes that you get, and then you sit there worrying about how many likes you're going to get, and I just can't deal with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very adult of you.
So anyway, well, I hope everyone has a wonderful summer. But this coming Friday, we have another special cantorial candidate. And I do encourage people to come. He's going to be from Argentina. So it's going to be on Zoom. But if you come into the sanctuary, the sound should be better. Unlike last night's sound, which was, I think the kids fiddled with all the settings because Jory had been in there that afternoon, had everything set up, checked the sound out with Jordan playing here to make sure that everything was right. And I think the kids just reset everything and messed it all up. And so you couldn't hear anything from Zoom, and in the sanctuary, you couldn't hear what the people were saying in the sanctuary. Anyway.
So we could hear really well on Zoom.
And
Yeah, it was
tomorrow,
weird.
Rabbi, you have Yisker, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we have Yisker tomorrow at 4. Yes.
So when do we light the candles?
It's Shavuot starting tonight.
Can I ask, when do we light the memorial candles for Zisker, or do we?
Well, tonight is Shavuot, and tomorrow evening is the end of Shavuot for the Reform movement. So you would do it, during Shavuot.
Are you
Would you
going
like
to be
tonight?
in the temple tomorrow night?
I'll be at the temple. It'll be at the temple and on Zoom. And I have a simple way of doing it. I sit there and I have my computer next to me, and a few people are on Zoom, and there are no technical problems.
Yeah, amazing.
Because I'm not using a mixer and all the craziness that we have in the temple.
Well, you
Was
wouldn't
this
have a
at
problem
4
with me
o'clock?
because I'd be asleep.
Rabbi, did you say Yisker is only on Zoom tomorrow?
No, I will be in the temple, and
temple.
it will also be on Zoom. Yes.
At
yes.
4 o'clock, or what time?
4 o'clock.
Early.
4
okay.
o'clock. Yes.
Okay.
And I don't have to turn on the system. I don't have to do anything. Just take my computer, plug it in, and make it really simple.
So is it blintzes or cheesecake? You guys
Both.
didn't have that debate last night.
It's
Both.
blitzes.
Anything dairy. Anything
Blintz or
dairy,
blitz-
and there's 16
cheesecake?
explanations.
It
Ice
was
cream.
so funny listening to that, because there's like when people who are Jewish ask me like, so why cheesecake? I go, I don't know, but there's like 20 different explanations for the
Exactly.
cheesecake.
I like the milk and honey one. To me, that makes the
Milk and
most
honey
sense.
is one thing. Kashrut laws for, I don't remember the exact thing, but it was something about how you don't eat meat. I don't remember, but
It's
anyway.
all made up. It is totally
Yes,
all
it
made
is.
up.
Somebody likes blintzes and said, let's eat blintzes for Shavuot.
Oh,
Boy,
wow.
my
All right, well, have a
sister-in-law
good-
makes a mean cheesecake.
Well, have a lovely time. Stay safe in Israel. Okay.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, I don't
Yeah.
do Facebook, so sorry. I just refuse to do that.
Well,
But
is Instagram better?
no, I mean,
No.
there's less dialogue, there's less, it's just different. So anyhow, but we'll
Thanks,
miss
everyone.
you, but we'll see you
Bye.
next Friday.
Bye.
So thank you. Bye, Rabbi.
Okay,
Bye,
thank-
everybody. Bye, Christine.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
y'all.
Have a good weekend.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.